Our first lesson is taken from Psalm 139, the same psalm that our recitation comes from. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought far off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. There is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. Where can I go from your spirit, or where could I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely darkness shall fall upon me, even night shall be as light around me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide me from you, but the darkness and the light are both alike. You formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God, and the sum of them. If I should count them, they would be more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Amen. And our second lesson is taken from a work called Heaven and Hell. To perform useful services means to live well and to intend good towards our neighbor for the sake of the common good. This is heavenly, to act towards others this way. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. To seek his righteousness means to seek his good. Those who are in the world who love their country's good more than their own good, and their neighbor's good more than their own good, those are ones who seek the Lord's kingdom. Amen. Here end our lessons from the Word. Blessed are they who hear the Word of God and keep it. Please rise. We're celebrating Baden-Powell's Thinking Day. Does anybody know what would be a good thing to think about on this day? Leadership. Now, why do you say that? It's a good trait of the Scouts, for sure, being able to take leadership and show direction when things, perhaps other people don't know what they're doing. The theme of leadership was chosen for this year because back in 1909, a group of young ladies and women came to Baden-Powell and said, what about us? What about something for the women, for the girls in scouting? And they showed good leadership. And from that point on, they began to develop a program that would include not just Boy Scouts or scouting for boys, but Boys and Girl Scouts. So looking back 110 years, it's a pretty long time. But we look back to that time, and that was how the theme of leadership or leading came to be the theme chosen for this year's Baden-Powell Thinking Day. Now, the Thinking Day comes from the idea that we're not just to be thinking about ourselves, but that we should be thinking about people in our community, obviously people in our own troop or in the own groups of scouts that we're connected with, but not just in our country, but all over the world, that we're to be thinking about other people everywhere and hoping for their good, and guided by the principles that help scouting be what it is. There are several duties that are mentioned in scouting. Again, does anybody know what those duties might be? Duty to God and Queen. That's particularly the part of the Canadian sense of duties that are mentioned in scouting. Duty to God, duty to others, and duty to ourself. Now, in this church, we believe exactly the same thing. You know, there's mentioned in our church about things that are celestial or heavenly, and that means our duty or our love towards God. And then there's things that we talk about as being the spiritual qualities of life, celestial, and then spiritual qualities which has to do with love of the neighbor or duty to others. And then there are the natural things that have to do with duty to take care of ourselves. So it's a wonderful correlation, and you'll find, of course, in pretty much all churches or all spiritual communities, they have that sense that there is something above ourselves, even as a community, above our individual self, but above ourselves that we're to be serving. So duty to God, duty to others, and duty to ourself. And there was a lot that Baden-Powell wrote about those qualities. And there's one thing I just wanted to read here. The founder's philosophy, we should take note concerning duty to others that it's not just, he said, patriotism, but the patriotism that has to do with a greater love. Patriotism above a narrow sentiment which usually stops at one's country. We need a better patriotism. This kind of patriotism, the one that is just about our country, inspires jealousy and enmity in dealing with others. Enmity is a kind of hatred. Our patriotism, he said, should be of a much wider and much nobler kind, which recognizes justice and reasonableness in the claims of others, which leads our country into camaraderie with other nations of the world. The first step to this end is to develop peace and goodwill within our own borders by training our youth of both sexes in the practice and the habits of life, so that jealousy of one town against another town, or one class against another class, or one sect or religious group against another one, this will no longer exist. To extend the good feeling beyond the frontiers of ourselves towards extending it to others. So that's one of the thoughts that Thinking Day and thinking about leadership, for us to take leadership in the way we look at our neighbor and not just think in terms of, well, just our little group or just our little segment of society or just our country, but that we should be thinking and extending our thoughts in our duty to others in a much broader way towards loving the neighbor in a greater way. So you know there's something called the promise and the law in scouting. The scout promise, I, on my honor, promise that I'll do my best to do my duty to God and Queen, as has been mentioned, to help other people at all times, to carry out the spirit of the scout law. The scout law to be helpful and trustworthy, kind and cheerful, considerate and clean, wise in the use of all resources. And there's a lot that could be said about all of these qualities. But one of the things that develops out of thinking of the promise and the law in scouting is to think about the 12 points that are mentioned in scouting concerning spiritual qualities that we need to develop. And it's good this congregation hears many things said from the teachings that are particular to our own church. But to think about how spiritual qualities are not just to be inculcated or adhered to just in our church, but they're in so many different places, such as in scouting. So I have a backside of a medallion, and I know you can't read all of these words from out there, so I'm going to read them to you. They're the 12 points that have to do with the scout law: to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And I'm going to flip that over. Again, I know not everybody can read that, but here's just that list of 12 points. Now, can anybody in our congregation think of anything on here that isn't included in the way that we ought to be practicing charity towards God, toward our neighbor, or towards ourselves? I would think you'd probably say no, because in fact all of these qualities are more or less spiritual qualities that are outlined in the teachings of the new church. I'm going to put this down, and I'm just going to go through these spiritual qualities. if we're thinking about trying to be a leader or leading, that's what Thinking Day's about. We're thinking about extending what we do to help influence others. These 12 points help us give some focus to the way we are and the way we should be as a good scout or a good new church person to live qualities of life, to learn how to not just educate our minds, but know how to learn by experiencing and doing things that bring skills to us, but also, most especially in scouting, is maybe not most especially, but the idea of learning by doing, learning by practicing. What is it to be trustworthy? Well, basically it means to tell the truth and to keep your promises. When you say that you're going to do something, a trustworthy person does what they say they're going to do. So honesty is a really important part of the code of conduct so that people can depend upon you as a scout or in scouting, but also you as any individual and the teachings of the church. Of course, honesty is said to be the bedrock of all the moral virtues. And as we grow and develop spiritually, the moral virtues are the foundation upon which all spiritual qualities are built. Those moral qualities focus in especially upon being honest. Being honest with God, being honest with your neighbor, and sometimes one of the hardest ways to be honest is to be honest with yourself. To really be able to, as the text said for the lesson today, to have God, to say, "Search me, O God, and try my heart. Know me. Try my thoughts. See if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." We need to be honest with the Lord and honest with ourselves to search through the things that we're thinking, the things that we're wondering about, the things we're thinking we're going to do, and to become trustworthy to not do those things. And that's sort of included in the other principles that are mentioned in the 12 points. Loyalty. Does anybody know what the quality of loyalty means? What's it mean to be loyal, Abby? Are you loyal to your parents? Sometimes. Oh, that's an honest answer. So step 2 comes after step 1, right? To be loyal means to be faithful, to be genuine towards the people that are supplying you with the things like your parents supply you with a home, right? To be loyal means to be trustworthy on a level that's a little bit broader. To be true to your family, to the leaders in scouting, to your friends, to your school, to your nation. To be loyal. The next point's mentioned as being helpful. Now, is that something that's in this church? Are we asked to be helpful? Well, absolutely. And it's something obviously in scouting as the third point being spoken to. It's to be concerned about other people. That's what it is to be helpful. When you see somebody needs something, and the typical classic thing is a scout helping a little old lady across the street. Have you ever seen that image or heard about that? And that's great. Today I got a call from somebody who said, "Is there anybody going to be at the church? Because I'm going to be arriving and I'm going to need to get in." Well, I came over here and I made sure the doors were open, which is kind of my job. But it's also like, well, that's just a way to be helpful. And somebody I know was out there in the back making sure the elevator was working. Or we call it a lift, not an elevator. That's being helpful, trying to look out for our neighbor. Being friendly. Be a friend to all. Seek to understand others and respect those with ideas and customs that are different than your own. To be a good friend doesn't mean just those people that are just like me, but to be a friend to everyone who you can be a friend to, that you can be helpful to, that you can be trustworthy with. Courteous. That's another one of the points. Courteousness means to be polite. We all learn how to be polite as we're growing up, don't we? We all learn that it's good to open the door for somebody else, or if you see somebody has dropped something, it's courteous to pick it up. It's friendly. To be respectful and courteous to people no matter what their age. Do you think people finally reach an age where they don't want people to be courteous to them anymore? Sometimes older people get a little grumpy. They still want you to be courteous to them. So, to always exhibit good manners. To try your best. And some of these kind of blend together. The next one mentioned is being kind. To understand that there is strength in being gentle. Big, strong person, much bigger than little people, might think they're more important or better. But among scouting or among people who are members of this church or other churches, the idea of being gentle, no matter how big you are or how old you are, to treat others as you would like to be treated. Now that's known as, what's that known as? To do to others as you would like them to do to you. What is that called, Gray? It's called the Golden Rule, and it's right in the principles of scouting. It also says in the notes that I found and want to talk about, it says to not hurt or kill harmless things without reason. Sometimes little boys and little girls see something much smaller than them, some creature, and wonder, I don't know, I wonder how many legs I can take off of this thing before it doesn't move anymore. Little insect or something. You know, and that can actually lead into another quality that isn't good. It's sort of a bullying quality to think, I wonder what I can do to somebody else who's smaller than me before they complain or before it's a problem. So we have to learn to treat everything with respect. And one of the guiding principles, again, in scouting has to do with the conservation of the earth and respect of our stewardship of taking care of the world. Obedience. Is that one of the hardest things for any of us to learn how to do? What do you think? Obeying the Lord's laws? Obeying the commandments of God? To follow the rules of your family or your school or your troop? To obey the laws of your community and your country? Now, if I asked all the grown-ups to please raise their hand if they ever broke the law in speeding, that might embarrass. But most hands, probably a lot of hands, maybe every hand in here who drives, has gone over the speed limit. Not a good thing. Sometimes we think we have really good reasons, and sometimes we may have a good reason to speed or to break the law. But for the most part, we're asked to be obedient and be respectful of all the laws of the land, including driving laws, which are some of the hardest ones. But also to be obedient in the choice of our words, to not say things that are against other people. This would be disobedient, and also isn't being kind. To think of the laws as unfair. Lots of times we think, well, if we just can say, well, that's an unfair law, I don't need to follow it. Well, you know, you're just trying to get around something, aren't you? Cheerful. That's another one of the points. To try to always look on the bright side of things. Now, we have a teaching in this church called the affirmative principle versus the negative principle. And the affirmative principle is to think about the things that God says in the Word and to first believe them and try very hard to uphold them and follow them and be affirmative to them, even if you don't understand everything. It's called the affirmative principle, as opposed to the negative principle. When somebody has a negative principle, they assume the worst to begin with and then prove to me things are better. But with a positive attitude, life is good. God's blessing us with many wonderful things. And if things don't particularly go our way, we want to find a way to kind of look towards the Lord or to look to other people to find ways to get help and to be more positive. Well, that's the aspect referring to cheerfulness. One of the things that Baden-Powell talked about in one of his writings has to do with whistling and smiling pretty much at all times. And I notice it's not so prevalent in the more recent things that I was reading about, but it also talked about how if somebody is kind of negative, that sometimes scouts will pour a glass of cold water down the sleeve of a fellow scout. And I see that was also taken out. Doesn't sound like actually following some of the other principles, but when somebody's disobedient and they're grumbling, that it might be good to take a cup of cold water and douse them. So I'm not recommending that. I'm only telling you that scouting has made progress and not shaming or trying to make fun of people or pour cold water on them. If any of you older scouts had that done to you, I hope it worked, and I'm sorry. But we won't be, I don't believe you're still doing that, right? No? Okay, get good head shake from the leaders over there. But to be cheerful. Can you always be cheerful? Is life always good? Are things always going well? No. And it's okay to feel pain and sadness and grief. And it's not saying that you can't, to be a good scout, you can't have any feelings that aren't perfect. No. We have to have the whole range of feelings. And sometimes we don't like things, and it's kind of hard not to show that we don't like things. But the principle being spoken of here is to try to be cheerful and to try to lead your group, your troop, the people around you, to be positive. And that's really important. We have an influence on the people around us. When we smile and we try to be cheerful, it helps other people. People tend to look at us, and when they see us, they kind of tend to reflect the same look we have on our face. So if we look at somebody and scowl, they usually start scowling back. What's the matter? If you look at somebody and you're more cheerful to them, you might find you get a more cheerful response. And there are some people that are just going to scowl no matter what. And there are some people that seem to have a smile on their face no matter what. But the scouting principle that's being talked about here is that we ought to try to be cheerful. The next one mentioned is being thrifty. Waste not, want not. To work to pay for our way in life and be able to help others. To be thrifty, not to be wasteful. To use our resources. It says here to save for unseen needs, to protect and conserve natural resources, not to be out in the woods and be just destroying things because there are so many trees. Why don't we just strip the leaves off of each one of the branches on this one? No, that's not being thrifty. That's not being conservative. And to carefully use our time and our property. 3 last ones: bravery, being clean, and reverence. Being brave is tough. Facing danger even if we're afraid. Now, being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. In our spiritual trials and temptations, which young people are relieved of until they get a little older, but older people see more and more trials and tribulations, we need to be brave. We need to ask for help. We need to especially know that when we're going through tough times, the Lord is our help. That we have a God that wishes us to be happy, but can't take away all of the trials and tribulations. To be brave is to say, I will be able to get through this with God's help. And to be supporting each other in scouting to help people who may have more fear. And to never, ever make fun of somebody who might be crying or might be sad or might be afraid. To have the courage also to be brave to stand up for what you think is right, even if others might laugh or threaten you. It's really easy for one person to make a joke about somebody and then another person kind of join in, and after a while you realize you've got one person on the outs who's being laughed at by other people. Show leadership, the theme is leadership, to say that's not very nice. And it's hard when other people are laughing for one person to say, maybe we shouldn't do this. But it's a principle of scouting for sure, and also of spiritual qualities in the church, to say, no, I'm not going to partake of that. Lots of times people like to talk about other people's problems, other people's faults, other people's flaws. And the second and third people can kind of join in and go, oh yeah, oh. It doesn't do anybody any good to focus that way on other people. But to rather say, let's look at the good qualities. We're told that the angels of heaven always consider the good things about others. Being clean, keeping your body and your mind fit and clean. Associate with those who believe in living in these clean ways to keep your home and your community clean. Keep your mind clean. That's a really important one. As we're growing up, it's so easy that there's a lot of things out there that can attract our minds and that would help not have us think straight morally or spiritually. And so a part of the principle is to keep your thoughts clean. And finally, reverence. Be reverent towards God. Be faithful in your religious duties and respect the beliefs of others. So these 12 principles or these 12 points that are talked about in scouting are good qualities that we can have in our minds to help us think about the way we do lead, the way we do partake in our community, the way our duty towards God and to the community and our duty towards self is fulfilled in the promises we make and the laws that we're trying to keep, and in the attitude we have. So on this day, this Baden-Powell Day, and why do you think it's today anyway? Does anybody know why it's today? You've already answered the question. I'm going to pull out, see if Connor has anything to say. Do you know why today is the Sunday that we're having Baden-Powell Day? Somebody's birthday. The 22nd is somebody's birthday. Whose birthday is it? Yes, Abby? It's a double birthday of both Mr. and, yes? That's right. They both happen to have the same birthday, even though I think he was 35 years older than her. But on February 22nd was their birthday. And so that's why around this time of year we have a celebration like this. We have a day where we come into a church, we think about the things that have to do with the spiritual qualities in scouting, and we rejoice that we're able to enjoy this in our country, and people all around the world are able to enjoy scouting. And so we proceed with that celebration. You're invited downstairs to enjoy some refreshments after we finish the service.